In part one of our Battle of Peleliu series, we followed the Marines as they clawed their way off the beaches under withering fire, surviving a landing that shattered even veteran combat expectations. What they didn't know was that the nightmare wasn't over. The second phase of the campaign, the fight to seize Peleliu's airfield, would prove just as brutal, if not worse, turning the island into a furnace of steel, blood, and exhaustion. So on the morning of the 16th of September, D+1, the Marines shouldered their weapons and moved off the beaches toward the blazing white coral flats of the airfield. What awaited them there, the open killing ground under the burning sun, swept by machine gun fire from the ridges, made the bloodshed on the beaches look like a prelude to something infinitely worse. The Peleliu airfield was a wide, flat expanse of coral, bleached white under the sun, completely exposed, and dominated by ridges thick with Japanese strongpoints. To cross it meant running across ground as bright as a mirror and as hot as a griddle, with no cover, while heavy guns hammered down from multiple elevations. Sledge called the airfield crossing one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. When Sledge and the rest of K Company finally advanced onto the airfield, it felt less like attacking an objective and more like crossing into a furnace designed to kill anything that moved. Sledge remembered how the enemy fire came from everywhere at once, from cave mouths high on the ridges, from cleverly camouflaged bunkers near the taxiways, and from interlocking machine gun nests whose fields of fire overlapped so perfectly that Marines couldn't cross 10 yards without diving into a shell hole. Mortar rounds fell with terrifying regularity, exploding in clouds of coral dust that blinded and disoriented entire squads. The hard ground shook under each blast, and fragments of coral sliced through uniforms like glass. As the Marines crawled forward, Sledge saw Sherman tanks lumbering ahead in direct support, their hulls cooking in the sun, their crews firing at cave entrances and bunker slits with 75mm rounds that sent showers of shattered coral into the sky. But even armor had limits on Peleliu. The ground was too uneven, too jagged, too riddled with hidden trenches and mines. Tanks were picked off by well-placed anti-tank guns or immobilized trying to negotiate the lunar terrain. That left the infantry to push forward yard by yard, firing into cave openings, tossing grenades into slit trenches, and hugging the coral for dear life. When they finally reached the main administrative buildings near the runway, low, blasted structures of concrete and timber, the Japanese defenders fought from every room and every collapsed corner. Marines kicked in doors only to be met by point-blank rifle shots or grenades rolled across the floor. Sledge wrote that the fighting felt close enough to touch the enemy, a claustrophobic brawl inside shattered rooms filled with choking dust, smoke, and the constant roar of gunfire. By the time the airfield and its buildings were secured, the Marines were drenched in sweat, half blind from glare and dust, shaking from heat exhaustion, and stunned by the sheer volume of dead left sprawled across the coral. It hadn't been an assault so much as a forced march through hell, one that stripped away any remaining illusions about how hard Peleliu was going to be. But what waited beyond was worse. On maps, the center of Peleliu is marked by a knot of jagged hills called the Umurbrogol, often referred to by Marines simply as the Ridges, or more grimly as the Pocket. This maze of cliffs, spires, razor-edged coral, caves, galleries, and fortified positions was unlike anything the Marines had encountered before. Sledge described the Umurbrogol as a complex of coral ridges that looked like the surface of the moon turned inside out and filled with death. The 5th Marines were tasked with pushing into this nightmare, clearing bunker after bunker, cave after cave, fighting enemies who were sheltered in heat-cooled fortifications while Marines roasted alive outside. Pushing into the Umurbrogol felt to Sledge like entering another planet, a broken, jagged nightmare sculpted not by nature, but by some malevolent force determined to punish anything living. Every few feet the ground pitched upward, downward, or sideways. Nothing was flat, Nothing was safe. The coral itself was jagged enough to slice open a man's palms if he tried to steady himself while climbing. Sledge remembered how even the simple act of moving forward turned into a slow, painful crawl through rock that tore at uniforms and skin. And everywhere, from every angle, the Japanese watched from hidden positions. The Umurbrogol was a fortress, layered, tunneled, and engineered to kill invaders by inches rather than yards. Japanese machine gun nests were rarely in plain view. They were recessed into cave mouths reinforced with logs and concrete, firing down narrow channels between coral knobs where Marines had no choice but to advance. When the guns opened up, the entire ridgeline seemed to tremble with the vibration. Mortars fell with terrifying precision, bursting against coral to create showers of shrapnel as sharp as razors. Sledge recalled how even small fragments sliced through flesh with the ease of broken glass. He saw Marines stagger back with blood pouring down their faces, their arms shredded, their helmets punctured by chips of coral rather than bullets. The terrain itself seemed to be attacking them. Moving up the ridges was slow, agonizing work. The heat between the coral walls was suffocating, trapping hot air like an oven. The stench of death hung over everything. Dead Japanese lay in crevices and caves, sometimes half mummified by sun and wind, sometimes swollen and blackened by the humidity. Dead Marines, too dangerous to retrieve under fire, remained where they had fallen. Flies gathered in such thick, humming clouds that Sledge could taste them when he breathed. He wrote that the Umurbrogol smelled like the world's graveyard, and that wasn't hyperbole, it was the simple truth of what he lived in. Certain positions acquired names that would echo through the lore of the 1st Marine Division: Bloody Nose Ridge, Hill 100, the Five Sisters, the Horseshoe, and the Grotto, a cave complex that became one of the most infamous strongpoints in the Umurbrogol. The Grotto was the worst of the worst. A tight labyrinth of caves, chambers, and honeycombed tunnels, it had become one of the strongest Japanese defensive positions on the island. As Sledge's company approached it, they encountered fire so concentrated it felt impossible for anyone to survive in front of it. The Japanese inside the grotto fired from slit-like openings barely wider than a fist, making them nearly immune to small arms fire. To root them out, Marines had to use flamethrowers, white phosphorus grenades, and satchel charges. Sledge remembered watching flamethrower operators step forward and seeing entire cave mouths erupt in rolling sheets of fire. The screams that followed echoed through the rock. Some Marines turned away, others stared silently, their faces blank. There was no room for pity. The Japanese would not surrender. Flamethrower teams became heroes and immediate targets. The moment a flamethrower ignited, every Japanese rifle focused on that Marine. Life expectancy for flamethrower men was measured in minutes. Sledge hated seeing them go forward. Many never came back. The battle only sank deeper into cruelty. Sledge's K Company was sent back into the Umurbrogol again and again, swallowed by a maze of shattered coral and hidden caves where the enemy refused to die, and the terrain itself seemed designed to break men apart. But the gunfire was only one layer of the suffering. Peleliu imposed its own punishment: relentless heat, thirst, exhaustion, and the omnipresent stench of rotting corpses baking in the sun, a smell that clung to uniforms, skin, and memory alike. Even when the firing stopped, there was no relief, only psychological pressure that ground Marines down day after day. By the time the battle moved on, many of the men were still standing, but something inside them had already been destroyed. In Part 3, we'll confront the true cost of Peleliu, the hellish living conditions, the psychological shock endured by the Marines, and the scars the island never let them leave behind.